So I think we can all agree that mass shootings are a pretty big problem, but it's really difficult to agree on a solution. And there are two important things I want to say in this video. First is that I think we should look for politically neutral solutions because we should understand each other's political points of view on the matter. The second important thing is that I think there are politically neutral solutions, and there's one that I really want to focus on. So first, obviously, I'm going to address the politicization of gun laws. And I feel like I understand both points of view at least a little bit. So ultimately, what it boils down to is the fact that passing restrictive gun laws is unfair. Debatably worth it, but definitely unfair. And the reason it's unfair is because technically what you're doing is you're punishing everybody, you're restricting everybody's freedom to own a gun because of a few bad people. In general, people agree that you shouldn't punish everybody for crimes that only a few people committed. And liberals and conservatives agree that fairness is an important thing. And in most situations, liberals care more about fairness than conservatives do. Liberals generally put fairness as a priority over things like loyalty and purity. But there are just differences in the ways that liberals and conservatives approach fairness. And the specifics on that are really hard to pin down. But basically, the liberal perspective on gun laws is that the amount of lives that would be saved by passing the gun laws outweighs the harm it does to fairness. And there's moral consistency on both sides of those. However, the conservative point of view requires a little bit of loss aversion. Liberals may be quick to point out that the restrictions that they want to pass on guns are very similar to the restrictions that already exist on using a car. A car is a very dangerous thing, and only people qualified to use it should use it. And there are some conservatives and libertarians that believe that car restrictions should not be imposed on people, because it's their perspective that even if some lives are lost, it's important enough to be fair and consistent. But most conservatives don't hold that point of view. They view things like driving without a license as something that they already aren't free to do, and gaining a freedom is different than losing a freedom. There are several studies that verify that the negative psychological impacts of losing something are greater than the positive psychological influences of gaining something of the same value. Most people are very consistent with this, which means there isn't necessarily a logical contradiction in the conservative point of view. But there's not necessarily a logical paradox in the liberal point of view either. They just believe that the human life that would be saved outweighs the crime you're doing to fairness. And once the two groups of people believe these different moral things, then wishful thinking is going to change the facts in different directions for both groups. Conservatives are going to be more likely than liberals to believe that gun laws wouldn't actually save that many lives, and liberals are going to be more likely than conservatives to downplay the impact that these gun laws have on fairness. So while I think we should get the facts straight about gun laws and what impact guns have on people psychologically, I think that we should also look for politically neutral solutions to the problem. And the big solution that I want to promote in this video has to do with the motivation that leads people to do mass shootings. And a huge part of that motivation is symbolic immortality or transcendence or fame. Terror management theory is the area of psychology devoted to studying what people do because they know they're going to die. They study how exactly knowledge of our own mortality influences us psychologically, and they've found that when you leave a legacy and you become heard of, if a lot of people know about you, then your impact is going to live on well after your own death. Many famous politicians, explorers, scientists have all achieved this kind of thing. There are many people who have written books that are still in libraries today and are still widely read. So a part of them is still influencing people today, even though they've died hundreds of years ago. And technically, since all you are is a pattern of neural connections that manifests itself in really specific ways that you call you, when you initiate similar neural patterns that have similar manifestations in other people, it's kind of like you're putting little bits of your own consciousness in other people, which means that you are existing, which means that death has been overridden a little bit. It's probably not as satisfying as literal immortality, but it's appealing to a lot of people. And several people who study terror management theory do claim that this is a huge part of why people do terrorism. So the solution I want to promote is that every time there's a mass shooting or some sort of act of terrorism, go onto Twitter and Facebook and glorify an artist. When you share news stories about a mass shooter, you prove to everybody that killing a lot of people will lead to that kind of transcendence. But when you glorify an artist, you're teaching people that art is a way to achieve that kind of fame and transcendence. Which would you rather promote? If you can help teach people that there is a better way to achieve the feelings that these mass shooters are trying to achieve, other than mass shooting, then I think you're doing a little good thing. You're going to make a small difference. So find an artist, a philosopher, a scientist who's done something that you think is great and talk about them. Try to let that person influence other people. And if lots of people share this kind of thing, then it's going to be more established in our culture that these are the ways to achieve what these people are trying to achieve. I moved to Vienna from the United States just this past year, and most of the statues are of artists, and all sorts of artists. There's musicians and poets and painters, and the fact that I walk by Goethe almost every day proves that poetry is one way of achieving immortality. And a lot of the statues in the US are of war heroes, which kind of promotes the idea that killing a lot of people will lead to that same kind of immortality. And who exactly statues are made of is a pretty small difference in a culture, but I think it contributes a tiny bit to the problem. Because there are so many more mass shootings in the US than in Europe, and there is reason to believe, based on some empirical evidence, that this is one contributing factor. When you glorify artists, you're doing something good for the world. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video. Definitely thanks for watching. Subscribe and like if you feel that's appropriate. And if you have other ideas for politically neutral ways to fight terrorism and mass shootings, definitely leave them in the comments. I think the more solutions we have, the better a chance the problem's gonna get solved. And even if you don't do any of that stuff, thanks for watching.